She married the man of her dreams, only to wake up in a world built to break her. When a self-made designer falls in love with a billionaire heir, she thinks she's found her forever. But wealth comes with shadows, and high society has rules for women like her. Rules written in whispers, enforced with smiles, and backed by power. As love and loyalty are tested, she must decide. Will she bend to fit into a world that wants to erase her, or rise and claim her place in it? Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The soft clink of crystal glasses and the hum of string instruments filled the grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel. Gowns swept the marble floors like whispers of silk and satin, and golden chandeliers flickered like stars caught in motion. Daphne stood near the edge of the crowd, her back straight but her hands curled slightly around a borrowed clutch. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. Her navy blue dress was elegant but modest, stitched by her own hands, and her heels had been polished 3 times to hide their wear. As an up-and-coming interior designer, she'd only received the invitation because of a last-minute cancellation. She wasn't here to network, she was here to observe, maybe to dream. Then he walked in. Albert Sinclair. Tall, commanding, with the kind of posture that came from generations of private schools and legacy wealth. His dark hair was effortlessly swept back, and his suit, tailored midnight black with a deep red tie, was the kind of cut that whispered exclusivity. Daphne had seen his face in magazines, on business articles, even in gossip headlines. But nothing prepared her for the gravity of his presence in person. Their eyes met across the ballroom. She looked away first. She didn't expect him to cross the room. She certainly didn't expect him to offer his hand. "Are you always this good at looking like you'd rather be anywhere else?" he asked, lips curled in the hint of a smile. Daphne blinked. "Only when I've accidentally walked into a room full of monarchs and millionaires." Albert chuckled, surprising her. "You don't seem the type to be intimidated by a few trust funds." "I'm more worried about stepping on the wrong shoes," she said, glancing at a woman in rhinestone-studded Louboutins. "Some of these cost more than my rent." Albert didn't laugh this time. He looked at her, truly looked. "You're different." She smiled tightly. That's one word for it. They talked for the rest of the evening, about design, travel, food, and strangely silence. She told him about textures and colors and light. He told her about pressure and legacy, and the loneliness that can come from always winning. She left that night without giving him her number. He found her anyway. What followed were weeks of phone calls that turned into dinner dates, dinners that turned into weekends away, and moments so surreal Daphne often pinched herself. Albert wasn't just rich, he was present. He listened. He saw her in a way no one ever had. The proposal came after 3 months, spontaneous, under a canopy of autumn leaves in Central Park. He didn't ask with a ring, but with a question. "Do you want to make this real? Not just for now, but for always." Daphne said yes with her whole heart, blind to the storm already brewing behind Albert's last name. She wouldn't meet Margaret Sinclair, Albert's formidable mother, until the engagement party. But when she did, it would become clear. Love had won her a prince, but she'd also awakened the wrath of a queen. Daphne had never seen a house like this, if you could even call it that. The Sinclair estate wasn't just a home, it was a statement. A stone-fronted Georgian mansion sprawled across meticulously trimmed lawns, guarded by wrought iron gates and a centuries-old hedge maze. It looked like something out of a history book, timeless, intimidating, and built to outlast love. The engagement party was Daphne's official introduction to the Sinclair family. Everything about the event reeked of orchestration. White roses trimmed to match the linens, a quartet playing Beethoven on cue, waiters in gloves that cost more than her favorite coat. This wasn't about celebration. It was about scrutiny. And then Margaret Sinclair entered. Her heels clicked like judgment against the marble floor. She was breathtaking in the way a glacier is breathtaking, sharp, icy, dangerous. Diamonds adorned her neck like armor, and her silver blonde hair was pulled into a chignon so perfect it might have been sculpted. "Mother," Albert said, stepping forward to kiss her cheek. Her lips barely moved. "Darling." Her gaze slid to Daphne like a scalpel. She extended a hand as if expecting it to be kissed. "So," Margaret said, looking her up and down. "You're the one he's been hiding." "I didn't realize I was hidden," Daphne replied with a polite smile, taking her hand with the kind of grace she'd practiced in the mirror. Margaret's grip was cool and brief. "Well, you've made quite an impression. Albert doesn't bring women to the estate. Not since Victoria." Ah, there it was. The ghost of fiancé's past. "Victoria's lovely," Margaret continued, sipping her champagne. "Harvard-educated. Old family. She spoke 4 languages and played concert cello. But I suppose you bring something else to the table." Daphne kept her smile fixed, though her nails dug into her palm. "I'm sure we all have our own kind of charm." Margaret didn't answer. She simply turned away, dismissal without words, and began mingling with guests, already orchestrating her next move. The evening blurred into 1,000 fake smiles and empty conversations. Daphne caught slivers of Margaret's influence at every turn. Subtle jabs from socialites, pointed questions about her ambitions, whispers about her being self-made, like it was a flaw. Albert tried, bless him. He stayed at her side, introduced her proudly, poured her wine and kissed her temple. But Daphne could see it. The way he winced when Margaret narrowed her eyes, how he hesitated when Daphne spoke too freely, too boldly. As they left that night, Albert laced his fingers with hers in the back seat of the town car. "She's just traditional," he murmured. "Don't let her get to you." Daphne looked out the window at the fading lights of the estate. She wasn't sure whether she was more angry or afraid. "She doesn't have to get to me," she said quietly. "I think she's already decided." Albert kissed her knuckles, but even his warmth couldn't shake the chill that Margaret had left in her bones. What Daphne didn't yet understand was that this was no passive dislike. Margaret Sinclair didn't just disapprove. She intended to destroy. It started with roses. A stunning bouquet arrived at Daphne's studio the morning after the engagement party. White peonies, pink garden roses, and rare orchids, so fresh they seemed to breathe. The note was unsigned, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "Elegance is an acquired trait. You'll learn eventually." Margaret Sinclair didn't waste time with open hostility. She preferred elegance laced with venom. Daphne didn't flinch. She threw the bouquet in the trash and kept working. But that was only the beginning. At a fashion charity luncheon 2 weeks later, Daphne arrived in a minimalist cream jumpsuit, elegant, understated, and entirely her. But when she walked into the ballroom, it was clear. Every woman was in pastels and lace, as though coordinated by an invisible dress code. A hush rippled through the room as she passed, and someone actually chuckled behind a flute of Prosecco. Margaret stood near the stage, dressed in blush silk and pearls, sipping tea with the poise of a duchess. "Oh, darling," she said sweetly when she spotted Daphne. "You must not have gotten the wardrobe memo. Didn't Albert tell you this was a garden theme?" Daphne smiled tightly. "Guess I missed the memo on conformity." Margaret's eyes gleamed. "Or perhaps you're just still finding your place." Albert laughed it off when Daphne told him. "She's just old school," he said again. "Don't let her mess with your head." But Margaret wasn't messing. She was building something. Carefully. Calculated. Rumors began to swirl in the society pages. Headlines like "Billionaire heir's fiancé once designed for strip clubs" and "Sinclair bride-to-be, talented or tacky?" popped up with carefully cropped photos and half-truths from her early freelance days. A client she hadn't heard from in months suddenly dropped her. A venue she had reserved for a high-profile project canceled due to internal changes. All strings pulled. Daphne began to lose sleep. She triple-checked emails, rehearsed what she'd say at events. Her confidence, so carefully built over years of independence, began to feel paper-thin. Every glance felt like judgment. Every smile felt like a test. The final blow came one Friday evening. A man showed up at her studio. Handsome, familiar, smirking like he owned something. Lucas Vale. Her ex. The one who'd cheated on her with her former best friend and tried to gaslight her out of their shared apartment. "I heard you're marrying money now," he said, leaning on the reception desk like a cockroach in designer boots. "Guess I should have stuck around." "How did you find me?" she asked, cold as steel. He grinned. "Got a call. Said you might be needing a little reality check. Or maybe I could be useful to a certain someone." He didn't say Margaret's name. He didn't have to. Daphne threw him out and locked the door behind him. But she stood there for a long time, trembling, one hand on her stomach, the other on her heart. She thought about telling Albert. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. Not until she had a plan. Because now Daphne understood. Margaret Sinclair didn't just hate her. She wanted to bury her. And Daphne? She had just decided she wouldn't go down without a war. The storm broke one sleepless night at the Sinclair estate. Albert had flown to Geneva for a 3-day board meeting, and the silence in the house was oppressive. Daphne stayed behind, surrounded by oil paintings of stiff ancestors and the cold echo of Margaret's disapproval in every hallway. Even the walls seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here." Unable to sleep, she wandered. At first, it was just to clear her mind, to pace, to breathe. But something drew her to the east wing, a part of the estate Albert rarely spoke about. It had been locked for decades, according to him. Just storage, he'd said once. Dust and ghosts. The door wasn't locked tonight. It creaked open with resistance, the air behind it still and thick. Daphne stepped inside and immediately felt the difference. This space was forgotten, not preserved. Furniture lay draped in white cloths, chandeliers dark, and the scent of old wood and hidden memories hung in the air like incense. She lit her phone flashlight and moved slowly, her footsteps muffled on the faded Persian carpet. Her eyes caught on a small chest tucked beneath an antique escritoire. It was the kind of thing someone might mistake for clutter, unless they were looking. She wasn't sure why she reached for it. Maybe instinct. Maybe fate. The lid opened with a groan, revealing a stack of letters tied with velvet ribbon, brittle with age. Each one was addressed to a name she didn't recognize, Catherine Vale. Her breath caught. Vale. As in Lucas Vale? The handwriting was Margaret's. Daphne sat on the floor, dust be damned, and began reading. The letters were passionate, almost desperate, love letters, dated back over 30 years. From Margaret to a man who wasn't her husband. A man with the last name Vale. Catherine, it seemed, had been the child from that affair. An illegitimate daughter, raised quietly under another name, erased from Sinclair history. One letter in particular chilled Daphne to the bone. He says if I don't comply, he'll go public. He wants money. Our child deserves a future, but not like this. If I pay him off, he'll vanish. I can't let this destroy what I've built. What the Sinclairs stand for. Blackmail. Secrets. Shame buried beneath marble and prestige. Daphne leaned back against the wall, heart thundering. Suddenly, Margaret's obsession with appearances, her venomous control, her fear of Daphne, made sense. Margaret hadn't just been protecting her son's legacy. She had been protecting her own lies. Daphne stood slowly, mind racing. This wasn't leverage. This was survival. If Margaret had gone to such extremes to keep her secret, there was no telling how far she'd go to silence someone who knew it. She didn't want revenge. But she was done being passive. She packed the letters, sealed the chest, and locked the east wing behind her. By the time Albert returned, Daphne greeted him with a kiss and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He didn't notice. Not yet. But the game had changed. She no longer needed to win Margaret's approval. Now she was 2 steps ahead, and Margaret Sinclair was playing defense. Daphne sat at the edge of their bed, the velvet box of letters beside her like a silent bomb. The room was dark except for the faint glow of city lights bleeding through the window. Albert was in his dressing gown, scrolling through emails on his tablet, his face lit in cold blue. I found something while you were away, she said quietly. He looked up, eyebrows raised. Something good, I hope? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pushed the box toward him. He opened it without suspicion, untying the ribbon on the top letter. She watched the moment his eyes moved from curiosity to confusion, then to horror. She wrote these, he asked, his voice tight. Yes. All of them. To a man who isn't your father. Daphne crossed her arms. You have a half-sister, Albert. Margaret paid to make her disappear. Silence fell. He looked up at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. This isn't your fight, he said slowly, almost pleading. Why didn't you come to me the moment you found these? Because I didn't trust you to do anything, she said, standing now. You keep telling me she's just traditional, that I shouldn't let her get to me. But Albert, she's been actively trying to ruin my life. That's not tradition. That's war. His jaw clenched. You went digging through private parts of the house. She's been planting people in my studio, spreading rumors, sending my ex to ambush me at work. What would you call that? Albert's silence was louder than any argument. The rift opened in that moment. Not with shouting, not with insults, but with disappointment. The kind that comes when you realize the person you love may never choose you over their past. He closed the box gently, stood, and walked to the window. I know she's difficult, he said finally. But this could destroy her. She's been trying to destroy me, Daphne whispered. The difference is, I haven't sunk to her level. Yet. The next morning, Albert was gone before she woke. A note on the table. Need time. Please don't make this public. She tore it in half. By the end of the week, Margaret made her move. A thick envelope arrived at her studio, delivered by a man in a gray suit who didn't meet her eyes. Inside, a formal draft of divorce papers, an offer of a $5 million settlement, and a confidentiality clause so tight it could choke a lawyer. No note. No signature. Just a subtle message. Take the money and disappear. Daphne stared at the papers. $5 million. Enough to fund a lifetime of freedom, comfort, even power. She could walk away. But she didn't want the money. She wanted the truth to mean something. With steady hands, she packed the envelope, drove to the Sinclair estate, and handed it to Margaret herself in the garden. I'm not for sale, Daphne said, voice cool but calm. Margaret didn't flinch. Everyone is. You're just holding out for a higher price. Daphne smiled. Wrong again. I'm holding out for my dignity. And whether you like it or not, I'm still your son's wife. You may have underestimated the difference between someone who marries for money and someone who marries for love. She walked away without waiting for a reply. Margaret stood perfectly still, like a statue. Cracks were forming. And Daphne? She was just getting started. The silence in their penthouse was different now, thicker, charged. Albert hadn't come home in 2 days. Daphne stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, watching Manhattan glitter below like a city on fire. Her reflection stared back, poised, exhausted, changed. She had loved Albert. Still did, in ways that made her ache. But something had shifted, cracked down the center of their marriage like fault lines under pressure. He hadn't defended her. He hadn't fought. And now, she would no longer wait to be rescued. Instead, she built. Within a month, Daphne launched her own firm, DJ Design Studio, in a rented industrial loft in Soho. No inheritance, no Sinclair money. Just her, a sketch pad, 2 interns who believed in her, and a growing list of smaller clients who appreciated talent more than pedigree. She worked 16-hour days, drank cold coffee, ignored the gossip columns, and refused to take Albert's calls. It wasn't about punishment. It was about becoming whole on her own terms. Still, Margaret didn't rest. A construction permit mysteriously vanished. A contract was rescinded after a polite call from an anonymous concern. A potential investor was warned Daphne was emotionally unstable. But this time, Daphne didn't back down. She spoke at design panels, networked like a storm, did local interviews about her design philosophy, spaces that are lived in, not just looked at, and built a brand rooted in resilience and transparency. The city began to notice. The name Daphne Sinclair started showing up on style blogs and Midtown architecture bulletins. Not as scandal, but as success. Then came the gala, a major art and design benefit, hosted by a luxury hotel chain, one of Albert's largest business partners. Daphne had been invited to showcase a concept space. She arrived in black velvet, her hair pinned in soft waves, wearing confidence like a crown. Across the room, she saw him. Albert stood by the bar in a crisp tuxedo, talking to executives, but his eyes locked on hers the moment she stepped in. He looked older. Not in years, but in weight. In regret. They didn't speak until the end of the night. He approached slowly, like someone unsure if they're welcome. You look unstoppable, he said softly. Daphne arched an eyebrow. I had to be. He paused. I've been watching your interviews. Reading the articles. I see you now, I think. For who you've always been. She didn't melt. Not yet. And your mother? Still thinks she's just old school? Albert exhaled sharply. I know everything. I found the rest of the letters. She confessed, eventually. He looked at her, eyes raw. I let her come between us. I thought protecting her was protecting the family. But you're my family now. Or you were. Are. If you'll have me back. Daphne didn't speak. Not right away. She reached into her clutch and handed him something. One of her new business cards. You want a second chance? She said. Start by investing in something real. He took the card. His hand shook slightly. Your firm? No, she said, meeting his gaze. Me. The press conference was held in the glass atrium of Sinclair Global's Midtown headquarters. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. The air was tense, charged like the moment before a storm breaks. Daphne stood just outside the limelight, her presence deliberate but distant. This wasn't her moment. It was Albert's. And it was long overdue. He stood at the podium in a charcoal suit, his voice steady as he read from the statement. Over the past few months, internal investigations have uncovered discrepancies in several historical accounts related to our family trust and private financial holdings. These matters are being resolved legally and transparently. He didn't mention Margaret by name. He didn't need to. The real damage had been done in the shadows, long before any public statement. One of Margaret's closest confidants, an old friend turned opportunist, had leaked everything to a financial blog. Decades of quiet payouts, a hidden child, and the extortion she'd committed in the name of family pride. Once the story caught fire, the board had no choice. Margaret Sinclair was stripped of her voting power and quietly removed from all official positions. Her portrait in the boardroom was taken down. She didn't show her face in public. Rumors swirled of a private retreat in Switzerland, of health problems, of social exile. Daphne didn't rejoice. Not exactly. But she did feel the tension in her spine begin to unwind. One morning not long after the conference, she returned to the estate, not to stay, but to retrieve a few of her things. She didn't expect to find Margaret waiting for her in the winter garden, seated alone in a wicker chair beneath a canopy of dormant roses. Margaret looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but spiritually, like a fortress after the gates have collapsed. So you've won, she said without looking up. Daphne walked over slowly, her heels crunching on gravel. No one wins in a war like this. We both lost pieces of ourselves. Margaret's lips twitched. I underestimated you. Daphne met her eyes. You tried to break me. I was protecting my son, Margaret said, but the words sounded brittle. You were protecting your version of him. The one who lives on in press releases and perfect Christmas cards, Daphne said calmly. But the real Albert? He chose me. And this time I choose him back. A long pause. Then Margaret gave the faintest nod, like someone acknowledging the shift in the wind. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Daphne turned to leave. Daphne, Margaret called, her voice weaker than Daphne had ever heard it. Yes, don't waste your victory. You've earned something precious, his respect. Hold on to it tighter than his name. For once, Daphne didn't flinch. I will. As she drove away, the estate shrank in her rearview mirror. Not gone. Not forgotten. But no longer a place she feared. It was the end of a dynasty ruled by silence and secrets. And the beginning of one led by truth. The house was smaller. Bright modern, filled with sunlight and smooth wood and tall windows that welcomed the outside in. No portraits of ancestors loomed. No silent staff hovered in the corners. Just space. Just breath. It was theirs. Daphne walked barefoot through the open-plan living room, a mug of jasmine tea in one hand, blueprints tucked under her arm. On the balcony, Albert sat with his sleeves rolled up, laptop open, glasses slightly crooked. He looked relaxed for the first time in months, free, not from responsibility, but from pretense. Their life had become something they built, not something inherited. Sinclair Global had weathered the storm. After Margaret's departure, Albert had restructured key leadership positions and, in a move that stunned the media, announced a philanthropic design grant in Daphne's name. The Sinclair Initiative for Ethical Architecture and Urban Inclusion. Her firm would act as lead consultant. When he told her, she'd blinked, stunned. Are you naming a legacy after me? No, he'd said, kissing her knuckles. I'm naming it after what I want to be remembered for. And that starts with you. Now she ran her fingers across the edge of the kitchen counter, reclaimed oak, warm and rough beneath her hand. She thought about everything it had taken to get here. The humiliation, the loneliness, the fight for her place at the table. And yet, she didn't want revenge. She wanted peace. Her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. Signed contract from the mayor's office just came through. You're officially designing the new community hub. Daphne smiled. She stepped onto the balcony and leaned into Albert's shoulder. Looks like we're making waves. He reached up, threading his fingers through hers. We always were. The future didn't look like chandeliers and legacy estates anymore. It looked like steel beams and sunlight, like holding hands through arguments, like loving someone enough to grow together, even if it meant breaking first. Later that night, they sat on the rooftop under soft cafe lights. A bottle of red wine between them. No guests. No gala. Just quiet laughter and the long, warm hush of belonging. Margaret never reached out again. A letter arrived once, a single page and signed. No apology. Just a pressed garden rose, perfectly dried. Daphne tucked it into a book and never mentioned it again. She didn't need an apology. She had something better, a life that was hers. No longer a guest in someone else's world. Now she ruled her own.